Hi everyone, welcome to November edition of Security Sessions. Security Sessions are roughly an hour's interactive webcast specifically for you partners, where you can hear about the latest Microsoft security updates, where we hope to dive in deeper into the detail and discuss specific projects with the subject matter experts. So today we've got myself and Adam, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Tom Wild. I'm a cloud solution architect for Microsoft, started in February 2017, and I'm specifically focused on security enablement for our partners. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Bell. I'm the UK lead for the customer experience team, or CXP as we're known. We're actually the security CXP, so I'm part of a team of approximately 25 people globally. And across our team, we're responsible for advanced threat analytics, the Azure Security Center, Cloud App Security, and Azure Information Protection. And I look after AIP and CAS for the UK.
Thanks, Adam. And you're going to kind of talk us through Azure Information Protection today, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. It's one of the hot topics this year, and there's been a lot of development this year and a lot planned for the coming year as well.
All right, let's take it away then.
Cool, thanks, Tom. So, look, I'm not going to stay too long on this slide, but anyone that's been in IT for a prolonged period of time like I have will this will look familiar. You know, back in the day, we sort of had everything that was valuable to us in an IT perspective on-premise, and around that, and whether it be multiple buildings or multiple sites, you know, we had our perimeter was very clearly defined. Now that perimeter, we had a firewall, and you know, we were hopeful that the bad guys were on the outside and the good guys were on the inside. But you know, obviously that picture's changed quite a lot, and you know, if I move to the next slide, you can see this is very much the reality of today. And in this picture, you can see that pretty much users now work from almost anywhere on any device, and a byproduct of that is that their information and the corporate information is now pretty much scattered everywhere.
So is that stored in some of those cloud applications as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, and some of this is, you know, we've talked to IT companies and they say, oh, we only have a few SaaS apps, but when they put something like Microsoft's Cloud App Security tool in place, MCAS, it really opens your eyes to, you know, what users do, and it's not necessarily malicious. You know, a lot of the time the users are just trying to do stuff themselves that's easy, and if we don't have apps enabled for them, quite often it's easy to sign up for a service and away you go, and before you know it, your data's kind of out there in corporate box or, you know, other locations.
So how do you protect data in that situation where you don't know where your information is?
So there's a few things, and obviously the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, I think, plays a big part in that, of which Azure Information Protection is, I would say, the cornerstone. And, you know, really, if you're not labeling and classifying, you don't know what you've got. We've got lots of information. There's a continuum of it. Everything from, hey, it's public data, we've put it out there, and we probably don't really care that much, but we want to know, to, you know, the kind of crown jewels of, you know, it's my secret corporate chili recipe sauce, and, you know, we're really going to hurt if that gets out there. So, you know, AIP obviously is a passion of mine, and that's kind of what we'll focus on today, as to how we can help try and get this picture back under control.
All right.
So, you know, just looking at this technologies available from Microsoft, you'll see there's quite a few products there. Obviously, we've got AIP in orange. That's the product that's very close to my heart. But I just want to touch on the two in the bottom left corner, actually, message encryption and conditional access as well. We've had some, you know, new improvements in our capabilities in that space that really make a big difference.
So what does the conditional access part mean for AIP?
Yeah, so as we know, conditional access has been around for a while now. It's part of the Azure Active Directory suite. We've recently got into public preview the ability to be able to set policies in conditional access that now apply to AIP. So anything that you could set against other areas, and it's things setting-wise, like are we connecting to an AIP protected document with, you know, from
like a trusted device and trusted location and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth. There's a moment there. Yeah, and any of those settings you can set today against other products, you can now set against AIP. So it's a big step forward for us.
Okay, cool. So for that secret chili sauce recipe, you can only be on a trusted managed device that's compliant with your MDM and it's in your corporate office subnet and those sorts of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome.
And look, there is plans to expand on this in the coming year as well, and we'll hopefully go a lot more granular on it, but it's a really good starting point.
So I can see message encryption on there as well. What does that, is that email? What does that actually mean?
So
How does that work?
we've had what they call Office Message Encryption at OME for a while. At Ignite recently, we just announced a new upgrade, let's call it V2. And this gives us some really good capabilities around ensuring that we can send an email that's protected from the user's device, it's protected in transit, and it sits protected at the other end. And for the most part, we will validate to the best of our ability that the user that receives that is who they say they are. And the great thing about this is it's once it's configured on the tenant, it's really easy for users to use. It's click a button, and the rest is transparent. And if the recipient it happens to be an Office 365 user and they're using, say, Outlook 2016, they won't even know it's been encrypted. It's completely transparent. So the user experience is a lot better than we've seen in the past.
And what if they're not using Office 2016 and things?
Excellent question. So there's a couple of options around that. The first is we've federated with three identity types. So if they're Gmail, a Yahoo, or a Microsoft identity, they'll click a wrapper email, they'll be redirected to Office 365, and they will log in with their credentials to a specific portal, and it will then web render the email they've been sent. If they're not a federated identity, then they get the option to click a one-time password button. We will send another email with a code in it, and then entering that code will then give you the same experience of web rendering that email for you.
Okay, so effectively anyone with an email account can receive an encrypted email now.
Absolutely, and it's a lot less painful than people might have experienced in the past trying to do this kind of thing. So
Brilliant.
It's a really good step forward.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
So there are a couple of extra technologies. If we're looking at AIP for a moment, we've got these kind of four areas, the life cycle of our documentation. I won't drill into it too much, but basically just stepping over them briefly, we need to be able to detect what we've got and what's important out there and be able to identify that. We've got a couple of ways we can do that. We've got the AIP scanner now, which will help scan documents at rest. And also we can set some automation in the AIP blade in Azure that will look for specific text patterns, either just straight text or regex, and based off detecting that in the document, we can then either make a recommendation or automatically classify a document. Second column, we've got classify, which is pretty much focused at your end user when they create or edit documents. That's an opportunity to then say, right, let's get this label classification into the document so we can start seeing what we've got out there. On the protection front, we're using what's been around for a very long time now, which is the Rights Management Service, RMS. That was released in Server 2003, so it's a technology that's been around a long time. It's very mature in the way that it works, and it's very well understood by the IT community out there. So for partners, that's probably not a new aspect.
So that part's not going away, the RMS part, it's just incorporated into AIP, is it?
Absolutely. So what we've tried to do is move away from just having this one option available. So, in the past, if a user wanted to try and protect something, they really had to think a bit like an IT person. So I need to protect this document before I share it, which means, it's a very one-dimensional conversation. And now with the procurement of Secure Islands a couple of years ago, we've tried to change that picture a lot more. So now it's more around this label and classification, and it's a much deeper and stronger story.
Okay.
And then we've got the monitoring and alerts. So we've got a track and revoke portal, which gives users the ability to see what content is being opened and where, and if there's somebody trying to access that content that wasn't approved, and then we have a kill switch where they can actually just say, no, actually I'm revoking access to that document, and then remotely kill it. So the protection here goes wherever the document goes. It's not restricted just on premise.
So that's even after it's stored on a USB stick or it's on an Exchange server somewhere else, they can still do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So it gives us a really good ability to see what's going on there. So I think from a partner perspective, what would be really good for you guys to see, if it's something you've not across already, is just, AIP touches a lot of different technologies. It's got quite a few settings available to it itself. What's the best way to get started with this? How do you move forward without digging yourselves a big hole for you or your customers? So In the customer experience team, we work with customers day in and day out. That's what we do. We're the customer-facing element of the product group, and our experience has shown that it's a very good idea, and the most successful engagements start off quite simply. So by that we mean, let's start with classification. Let's just start looking at what data we've got out there and labeling it, whether it be through end users, setting that at the time of creation when they edit it, excuse me, or whether it's through using the AIP scanner. But let's just start labeling. That way we can start building up on top of that and doing additional actions once we stabilize.
And those labels, Adam, like what does that actually mean? Is that something that other DLP systems can see as well? Are they where are they actually stored on the document?
Absolutely, and I've got a slide coming up on that. So if I can, Tom, I'll just plug that one for a moment, but I'll move on to the next one. So you touched on a good area there, which is what's this thing about, and the crux of it, it's about taxonomy. And we've done a lot of testing internally at Microsoft, and it's been deployed within Microsoft. It's taken quite a while. But the starting point and the point that probably takes a lot of effort, and it's not even technical in nature, is agreeing that taxonomy. So, what labels are you going to use? What labels make sense to the customer from their perspective? And it does vary slightly by customer, but what we found is we've got a default set of labels that are created when you activate AIP in the tenant, and they're a very good starting point. This is an example of what we've used in the past, and this is what we used internally at Microsoft for pilot, but did change a little bit actually. So as you can see, that personal label there, actually during piloting, we discovered that this can actually be quite confusing. Is that personal to me, or is that personal identifiable information? So there's a bit of confusion there. So actually in Microsoft, during the pilot phase, we changed that to non-business. So I guess the message from this is try and get the taxonomy in the best shape you can at the start, but going through your pilot and your testing, you do have the ability to change labels. They're not sort of set in concrete at that point.
So making it as easy as possible for the end users, right? Because it's them that will be classifying net new documents.
And that's a really good point. And this touches back on my comment before around RMS. When you've only got to protect, that's a very one-dimensional conversation. Now I feel we've changed this to a much better proposition for the end users. And so it's something they can relate to, is it confidential? Is it public? Is it personal? That's stuff they kind of get. And let IT worry about whether confidential means it's going to be protected and whether restricted has visual markings. That's stuff that, we can take care of. And then I'll put this slide in because, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, Tom, this really is driven by the end users sitting in front of keyboards for the most part. And these are people that, are not there to classify your data. That's just something we want them to do as part of their day job. So we want to minimize the impact to them as much as possible. And so this really is around, look, there's 4 areas that we can classify data. So we've got the user sitting there manually sort of picking that when they create the data. And we're trying to make this really simple. Currently there's a toolbar. It's a one-click kind of progress and away you go. And then we've got automatic. So based off this text, it's text in your document or a regex string, we can say, hey, we think this should be, and it will classify it. And we can do the same thing, either recommended or automatic. So there's a choice there. And our experience is, the most success is if you recommend, because it gives the user the option to actually override that and say, actually, no, I'm sending a credit card number, but it's for my wife, she's buying a Christmas present. It's not really finance, which is this reclassification aspect as well. So a large portion of any information protection project should factor in the end user communication and user training, because that's obviously critical to success.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the biggest challenges I've heard from partners where they've had data classification projects is scope creep and user adoption. So I think we've done quite a bit of work around how we can help users adopt this, right?
Absolutely. So look, the CXP team in particular, we have guidance, some getting started guides, and we've also got anonymized documentation we used internally for email communications and that kind of thing. And we're happy to share that with partners that they can then use with their customers. So, reach out to me either via you, Tom, or I think my Twitter handle is at the front there, and we're more than happy to share that, so that helps you guys get up and running a lot quicker as well. And then you touched on this before, and this is the slide I was talking about. So even if the document in question is protected and therefore it's encrypted, the label itself is written in the metadata in the file, presuming it's a native file. So obviously we can't support everything because not everything has metadata. But for those documents do, which is kind of the Office documents in particular, you can still use your DLP engines and Office 365 and your CASB, whether it be Microsoft or otherwise, to look at that metadata, look for that label, and actually then take an appropriate action at your edge as well. So obviously we got a few slides, but it's not as much interesting as demonstrations. So let's see if we can just show you some of this stuff. So I will go through kind of some of the basics as well, because we don't know if everybody's come across AIP and is using it. But what we have, I'll go back to the dashboard for a second actually. So you've got your dashboard. You can actually literally just type info, excuse me, in the search bar, and that gives us the Azure Information Protection blade. So on here you will see I've got global policies and I've got scoped policies. And quite obviously the global policies are what applies to all users in your environment, and this is where you want to get the large breadth of effect. So we've got our default labels. I've got a couple additional ones here. I've got a GDPR label just to show a demonstration. And if I click the little black triangle, we've got some sub-labels. And these labels, you know, we find have been very successful, and there's some deliberate naming here. So you see I've got confidential and I've got highly confidential. Well, you know, I could have used restricted, but then is restricted more secure than confidential? There's, you know, some confusion there. So by repeating the word confidential, we're very clear in the order of our labels. So these have tested really well, both with customers and also internally at Microsoft. And these are a really good starting point. You know, I would suggest use these to get you going, and as you're going through the design phase with the customers, identify those unique areas that might need something a little bit different, but you should always try and keep the smallest set of labels you can, because the more complex it is, the more of a mess things turn into. And as you can see on this table as well, we've got indications of whether we're using visual markings against some of these labels, and then also whether we've got protection. So for example, if I was to look at the finance team label just for a moment, these are the settings that we have available. So obviously my label's enabled. The description is really important. Mine's not so great because it's just a test lab. But this description is what appears in the tooltip in the client side. So the better the context you can make for your end users here, the more success you're likely to have. We've got protection enabled. And here are your choices. So you can see I can set permissions. And what's interesting here is if I go to add permissions, it doesn't have to be somebody just within your tenant. You can actually enter details here, and you can put a partner tenant in. So if you're working with externals, this is a really great way of setting permissions where you can share securely.
That's awesome. I can also see the hold your own key option there as well. That comes up quite a lot, Adam. Can you run through that?
Yeah, look, the key conversation will be quite in depth. There's kind of 5 scenarios there, but at a high level, there's kind of 3 choices. There's the Microsoft Managed Key, which is the default, which is where we generate the key in Azure and we store that for you. You've got the Bring Your Own Key. So you've got your own HSM module, which you will export keys for, then you can import into Azure Key Vault and make available to AIP. And then you've got the Hold Your Own Key. So that's where you actually have your own HSM on premise, and you actually keep your key on premise there as well. And there's some pros and cons for each one. I'll save that for another day, but at a high level, that's the 3 choices you've kind of got on the key side of things.
Okay, cool. So there's flexibility depending on what they're requiring.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and you can change. You're not locked in. So if you decide to go 0 and decide that you want to bring your own key later, that's something that you can change. So there's some options around that. As you can see on this particular label, I've got the choice to configure some visual markings, which I've not done in this instance. We've also got, you know, colors, font size, etc. Now, the takeaway for partners here, I would say, is when you're doing this with your customers, you really want to make sure that if they have templates for their Office documents, that this is tested against those. Generally, it's a pretty good experience, but we have seen customers where they kind of footers clash. So that's the kind of thing you want to work out ahead of the time, and then work out how you're going to manage that. And then you can see I've got some automation here. So I'm saying if I see more than 2 credit cards, then I actually want to set this label automatically. So this is where you can start to apply conditions. And if I click on this actually for a moment, This is one of the areas.
Sorry,
Go on.
they're the ones that come with by default, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Office 365 has 80 plus types kind of baked in out of the gate. These are kind of a lot of the common sense things you probably want to look for anyway. And if you've got an interest in GDPR, a lot of these, will be relevant. So, we've got like national insurance numbers and UK driver's license and that kind of thing. So AIP is very useful when it comes to obviously the GDPR story and understanding what we've got out there, because we can help label it based off the content we see in documents.
So if you've got a certain type of employee number or ID, you can customize that in that sort of custom section there, and it'll.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's not one of the pre-made ones, you can either just put a phrase in here that you care about. So you could put a project name, or you could actually use a regular expression and go for your heart's content to find the right condition that meets your needs. So we've got quite a bit of flexibility there.
Awesome. And you can have multiple conditions per label?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess one of the comments I've seen at the moment is we don't have a straight up GDPR label or condition. So, but you could go in and add multiple, requirements that meet to build your GDPR label if that's something you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that'd be extremely long, wouldn't it? A GDPR classification for anything.
I think we've got about 23 conditions. And the challenge when it comes to engineering is, do we work on things that, might take a user 15 minutes to do by hand? We'll make that a bit easier. Or do we work on things that have a bigger impact, like, classification and labeling in the Office for Mac? So at the moment, it's just been about priorities, and we're working on the kind of bigger things. But I can see at some point, it'd be interesting whether we circle back and do some of the smaller details. So that's kind of the admin side and the conditions you can kind of set in the labels we've got. Scoped labels is very similar, except for the fact you're applying it to a specific set of users. So this is where, I've got Project Secret Squirrel. I only want people in the Secret Squirrel group to get access to this label, so they're the only ones that will see it. And we will apply protection when that occurs. So, there's the ability there to add just the specific labels where they're needed. And again, we suggest keeping everything as minimal as possible, but you've got to make sure that all requirements are met as well.
Awesome, that's good.
Yeah, and so look, that's the admin blade. I'll just jump into the client quickly. We'll use Word as an example. You kind of got two choices. We've got the toolbar you'll see here. I don't have a default label set, so I don't have a label set currently. We've got a kind of 6 high-level ones in this case, maybe 7. Can I count? 7. And then you can see we've got sub-labels. And as I mentioned before, your tooltips, as I hover, you will see the description as we talked about before. Where's my finance one?
So just on that, Adam, that protect section there in the toolbar, at the moment that's a separate add-on, isn't it? A separate installation. So you can roll it out with Intune, like Office Pro Plus, and then the AIP install. Is that eventually going to be built into Office? Like, what's the plans on that?
It is indeed. So today you need to install the AIP agent. There's 2 flavors, if you like. We've got the general availability one, which is our current stable, and then we always have a preview client available. And we generally try and go from preview to GA about every 12 months. So we do about 4 a year. We're always just introducing improvements and new functionality where we can. And so, yeah, you'll get the protect button here. Now, you'll notice when I extend on this, we've also got the same labels available. So there is a setting, global setting, that will actually remove the toolbar if that's something a bit too invasive for you, and you can just do the drop down.
So the user that's logged in at the moment, they're part of that Project Secret Squirrel.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So my test user is. You can also set custom permissions, specifically just for this document. And here's the track and revoke option as well. Now, I don't have anything out there, so I think if I click this, it's probably not going to take me anywhere. So let's have a look. Yeah, I've got no documents. But this is where you could see where your documents are being accessed, and you can also, from this location, say, no, I want to revoke.
So after you've shared it, you can see the locations and then the alerts, access denied and stuff. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah. So you've got full control over your documents once you've protected them. And so kind of this is the same reflection as we get here. And if I go to general, and if I had automatic rules, when I started to type here, like let's have a look, project. I don't think I've got the automation set on my secret squirrel. No, I haven't. So this is where if I had that text set for that, I would then get a recommendation here to actually override that, but I've not actually got it set for this test. So that's the client-side experience. The other way you can protect things, and this is in particular for things that don't support native documents like a text file, is if you've got this right-click menu, classify and protect. So from here, when it opens, we can see that I've not set anything yet, and some of the labels aren't available because I don't have protection applied to them. I'm going to apply and done. Now the catch with this is, if we look at the actual file itself, it's now a ptext file for protected. And the reason we do that for file types that aren't native is that once they're encrypted, the operating system actually doesn't know what to do with it. So by renaming it, we also get the Azure Information Protection viewer. So
if it's a non-Office or non-supported document, file I should say, it opens up in the AIP viewer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, the popular one on this front currently is PDFs. We've been working quite closely with Adobe around this, not through pressure from Microsoft actually, but pressure from customers. And they're in the process at the beginning of next year, the first half I think it is, of actually then releasing AIP support in their Adobe Reader product to start with. And also they're updating their PDF structure to RMV2, I think it's called, and that will actually support labeling in the header as well. So we've got some really good developments coming out of Adobe next year too.
Brilliant.
Okay, so that's client side, and that's the admin blade. The other thing I can show is the scanner. So the requirements in the scanner on the website, it's well documented even though it's in preview at the moment. So to play with this, you'd need to download the preview client, which then gives you the PowerShell command that's available to install and configure scanner. I think it's 4 gig of memory and a couple of procs for memory. Sit on a VM or a physical box, whichever works better for you. It is aimed at on-premise data at rest. So that's anything with a CIFS share. So it can be, on a SAN, on a Linux box, or obviously a Windows server. And it can also scan SharePoint 2013 and 2016 document libraries as well.
So this is awesome, because this is something that comes up all the time. It's great for net new documents and ones that people will create in the future. But what about all my 17 terabytes or whatever of previous data? Does this hook into the settings that you had in the Azure portal? And kind of
Absolutely. So what we're trying to do is make things uniform and obviously as easy as possible. So it just requires SQL Express as a minimum. It can be local, it can be remote, or it can be any version of SQL above 2014 and above. It's a pretty simple install. I've imported the Azure Information Protection module. It comes with the preview client currently. It's a one-line install. It takes less than a couple of minutes. I then provide it by running this particular commandlet. An account is a local admin on this machine. And then from that point, you can add some content and we can start configuring it. So I'll run some commands here. I'll tell it that I want to add a repository. That gives me, I've just got local content for the demo. If I look at what repositories I've got, you can see I've just added that one. And then we'll give it some configuration. So in this particular command line, I've got it in Discover mode. So there's 2 modes. You've got Discover, which will just kind of give me an audit, or you've got Label and Protect, where it will actually go and label the content it sees, and if required, if that label has protection, it will encrypt it as well. And as you touched on, Tom, it's getting these settings from that automation that you set on your labels. So where you've added conditions, it looks for those conditions, and if it sees them, it will actually then apply that label at that point. And that includes if you've set a default label as well, which I haven't for mine. I've got it to run one time, and I think it was a full. So there's no UI, which is probably the biggest comment at this point. What I will say, I think Microsoft's recent posture is we iterate early and often. So this is our V1 product. It's robust and it works, but at the moment it's not particularly pretty. So it installs as a service. So I will start the service, and once it's finished the scan, it will stop. Now I've set the schedule to be one time, but if I sent it to be continuous, for each repository that I add to the scanner, it will go back to the start again once it's finished. So if you've got a couple of SharePoint document repositories and a couple of file servers, this will just keep continuously scanning. So it will catch those new files when they're added. And what we get at the end, if I go to my, so I'll show you what I've got actually. So I've got content. Let's show you what it was scanning. Sorry, it was a very good demo of me. I've got this folder called PII, and I've got a bunch of files in here. I think there's 41 with different files in here. They've got different variants of PII data. I deliberately only have labels that will pick up a couple of them. So I think I picked UK driver's license and UK national insurance number. When it's finished, we get these two files. So we get a nice summary file. I say nice, it's succinct. It gives us a very high level, scanned 41 files. It found 3 that matched my GDPR label. I don't have a default label, so nothing else was applied, and we skipped 38.
Cool. So, and it hasn't actually applied them at this stage, is it? It's more of a...
No, it tells you up here, scan mode. So, you know, it looks like it may have, but it hasn't. It's just giving us an audit. So it's a really good, quick way to get an idea of what you've got out there. I don't have Excel installed on this machine, which would make this nice and pretty and easy to read for you. But what it does do is it goes through line by line and identifies the 3 that it's found and why it's matched them and where they are. So it's picked GDPR, and it's done it because it saw a UK driver's license number. And then we've got a UK national insurance number. And it gives you time. So you can get a good view of what the behavior would be without actually running the risk of actually doing it.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a quick question, Adam. How does it work in terms of changing does it change any dates on the files itself, like date modified and things like that?
Excellent question. So yeah, I was just looking at the configuration here. You can see we've got this override label. So not override label, sorry, preserve file details. Wrong line. And from this, you know, it's on by default. We don't change the timestamps, so it won't affect your backup and that kind of thing solution. But it's configurable, so it's what works best for your environment. If you wanted to change that for some reason, you can turn that off.
That's really good, that.
So that scanner, it's in preview today. We generally do public preview for about 12 weeks. So I would expect that to probably GA early in the new year. And I am hearing from the team that we will continue to have incremental updates on this during the course of the next 12 months or so. So it will only get better.
Brilliant.
Last thing
that's really handy.
Show you. Yeah, look, I mean, it's great. It takes that data at rest. So that's, you know, it's great. The last thing I'll show you is Office message encryption. So I've got my Paddington Bear user here. I'm just a job logs user, nothing particular flash. I'm going to send a new email, and what you do, it's been configured on my tenant, which is about 20 or so lines of PowerShell, so it's not a lot. Click the Do Not Forward button, and you can see that we've just applied a policy here that we don't want this email to be forwarded. I will now send this to a Gmail account. Let's say... Oh, I can't spell. Okay, if I send that, now if I go to my Gmail client, you can see what's, as you can see, I've been doing a bit of testing just to see if this works. While they're waiting for it to come in, I'll just show what it looks like. So because I'm not an Office 365 user, I'm not in Outlook 2016, I get what we call the wrapper email. And this email just lets me know I've got an email that's been encrypted and that I need to click here to read the message. So let's just see. There we go. Okay, so if I click that, you'll notice if you see the URL that I'm being redirected to Office 365. Now I've already logged on to my Gmail, so my token's passed through and I'm logged in automatically. You can see my username at the top there. And it's rendered the email in the web page. And if I click, I can't forward and I can't print.
That's really smart. So they can't do anything with that email effectively.
No, that's right. And like I say, if I'd been an Office 365 user, or I'd been outside of one of those 3 federated entities we talked about, then there's a process there. Actually, if it'd been Office 365 user and Outlook 2016, it would have been a seamless experience. Because I've logged in previously, it's logged me straight in, but what you normally get is the option to log on with your Gmail credentials. So it's not asking for something else, it's your identity that it's been sent to.
So no one needs to create multiple accounts and have multiple passwords and things like that.
Yeah. If I do it again, I wanted to show you the one-time password, but because I've already done this, let me try sign out actually. Try this one. What I wanted to talk about just for a moment was the one-time password option, just to sort of illustrate that. So let's just try that again. That's what I'm looking for. So you can see who sent you the email. I get the prompt to sign in my Gmail account because that's who it was sent to. But I've also got this option if I, in this case, I've got the option because I am a Gmail. But if it had been sent to something outside of those three identities, we've got the choice here to still get hold of that email, and it's still a fairly trivial process. So it's a nice experience for a change.
Brilliant.
Yeah. It needs some improvement as well. There's some scenarios that customers requested that it doesn't support yet, like, well, I want to forward my, do not forward email. So there's things we're looking at there. I'll touch on user voice actually towards the end. I think we've got a slide in there around that, but that is where you go to lodge all your feature requests, basically. And so that's AIP v2.
Awesome.
Back to the slide deck for a moment. I've got a couple more slides. I don't want to sort of belabor too much on the death by PowerPoint, but there's some good things on roadmap that are probably worth calling out. This is just touching on the fact that we do obviously have PowerShell as well. So the majority of what you can do in the UI, you can do through PowerShell as well. So if that's where you prefer to do your admin. Do we have time to talk about roadmap?
Absolutely, that's what people really want.
So none of this is under NDA. It's all been talked about at Ignite this year. So if you've been to Ignite or you've seen all of the presentations around AIP, none of this should come as a big surprise. As you can see, we've got quite a compelling story today. We're on Windows, not a great surprise there. We've got an SDK where you can encrypt documents at source if you want to roll that into your bespoke in-house applications, or if you're a vendor. We've got encryption in Windows and Mac for email, but it's all largely around encryption because it's been around a long time. That sort of labeling is kind of new. So what we're working on in the next, say, 12 months is to focus on a cross-platform story. So it's really around what we've got out there. So users are working from anywhere on any device, so we need to support that as well. So we're talking about getting native into the Office for Mac client coming out next year. We're going to improve our web applications, so we're native on that front as well. So in Word Online, if you go to click a protected document, you're not redirected to the desktop client. You'll be able to consume it there as well, and also classify and label. And also on the mobile, on iOS and Android, it's coming, so you'll be able to classify, label, as well as protect. So that's all around the native story, and we're also going to go native in the Office Click to Run client, so that you no longer have to install an agent. It'll just be built in rather than bolted on.
The big ones there are the SDK, so third-party apps can actually use AIP. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that one's coming. So this is just a quick look from an engineering grab at the Office for Mac. As you can see, we're displaying labels as opposed to just protection templates. And if you pick a label that has visual markings, it'll be applied to your Word document on Mac just as if you're on Windows. So it's really looking at that cross-platform story a lot more. Unified, you may have seen we have 80+ types, and we're in the Azure Information Protection blade. If you've used Office 365 for any period of time, you've got the Security and Compliance Center. It can be a bit confusing about where to go for what. This is really around trying to get our unified story in place there. So, we've already got the DLP types in place. We're going to see a lot more work happening between the Security and Compliance Center and AIP to make that a lot easier for our users. And also we've got the some investments there so that the experience is consistent regardless of where you're coming from. So we've got the SharePoint Sync client, which will soon start to be able to synchronize IAM protected libraries as well. We talked about anywhere, so we've got to be able to do our data at rest. We've got MCAS, which is now understanding, and I think it's in public preview, that it can understand AIP classification types, and it can actually take action from the cloud perspective as well. And this is stuff we will expect to see coming into the Office 365 Microsoft applications shortly as well. Be able to reach out and apply labels and protect where we have files on those assets.
Brilliant. What's the user voice, Adam? Do you want to run through that?
Absolutely. So this is really important. So user voice, if you've got a blocker, if you've got a problem, if you've got a feature, so not a problem, if you've got a feature you want to see in the product, user voice is a place to go. See who's already requested features. You can vote them up. If your feature isn't there, you can add it. The one thing I would say here is don't use like a Hotmail address. Use your corporate address because it kind of carries a bit more weight. We can see, what organizations are really looking for these features. The feature PMs and the product as a whole, we're looking at user voice and we're looking at like the top 10 requests, as this will drive input into what features we put into AIP next. So whenever I'm working with a customer and they say, oh man, I really wish it did this, I go, yeah, great. I will take that information back to the product group because that's a big function of what we do. We take that feedback back, but it really helps if you're putting it up on user voice as well. Whether it be partners or customers, it all carries that extra weight to give us visibility of what's important to you guys.
That's brilliant. It's like they can really bump up the request to the top of the queue, can't they?
Absolutely, and the product group look at this. So this is a direct input as to what features we consider to put into the product and the roadmap. So, yeah, definitely a place to go. The other place I suggest it's not on here is the AIP Yammer. We do watch that as well, and that generally is more for the kind of TechNet forums used to be for around support and hey, I'm stuck. But if it's true support you're looking for, obviously your normal support channels will be your best avenue there.
That's a good call actually. So we'll include the Yammer address when we send this out. Brilliant.
Yeah,
that was awesome, Adam.
Happy to help. Love. It's an important topic. I think, if you look at the larger DLP story, it's really hard to catch what you don't know. And by knowing, you've got to label it so you can make that decision. Awesome.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks very much for Adam's time. That was really useful, especially with what's coming up in May, as we all know. So, this is a message to all of our partners. Can you let us know if this session was useful, and give us some feedback on it, and basically vote for what you want the next session to be. What other type of security? Do you want to dive in deeper into AIP scanning, or do you want to look into compliance or Azure Security Center or anything like that? So go to aka.ms security session vote, give us some feedback, and vote for the next session. So yeah, we'll close it out. Thanks again to Adam, and we'll see you all next month.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks everybody. I hope it was useful.
Cheers.